What's going on YouTube? This is episode 1 of me editing your photos, and if you'd like to submit any photos for this series, then be sure to follow me on Instagram because that's why I'll be posting instructions on when submissions are open. So I'm not going to edit every photo that you send, but I'm going to try to look through all of them and maybe give suggestions on anything that I see based on the images that you send. So for episode 1, this is the first photographer, and he sent one image. And let's look at the camera settings that he used. ISO 100, 18mm at f13 at 1/80th of a second. Just from those settings alone, I'm pretty sure that this image has motion blur because it seems like he's walking. I'm pretty sure the person who's taking the picture is hand holding the camera and the shutter speed is at 1/80th of a second. And if I zoom in, sure enough, there's motion blur in. It's not that much, but it's definitely something there, and that could have been avoided by increasing the shutter speed. He shot it at f13, which could definitely be lower. I'm going to assume that he just wanted everything in focus, so you don't have to go for a shallow depth of field for every photo that you take, but if you wanted everything in focus, he probably could have shot it at around f8 maybe, and increased the shutter speed just a little bit so you can get rid of that motion blur in the image. But other than that, that's cool. Now it does say the flash did fire, so that makes me assume that he shot it in auto because I don't think the flash would have fired if he was shooting it in manual, but it really doesn't do anything for the image. And the settings that he used weren't really geared for using flash in this image. To start developing it, I like to take the exposure down just to see what we gain back. And there's a lot of information in the sky that's there. And if I bring back some of the highlights, lower the exposure a little bit, that brings back some of that sky detail. And let's increase the shadows a bit, not too much. And let's see, just the white balance just a little. All right, that's not too bad. Let's drag the black point over just to give the image a little more contrast. And that's a good starting point, I feel. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit in Photoshop. Now the reason I'm going to edit in Photoshop is because I can use my presets, but I don't have to use them at maximum strength. So I can duplicate the layer and go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and over to my presets. Now I have all of these film presets, and I'll have the link to those down below in the description box. And let's go with maybe a Portra 400. I have 36 versions of this film, so let's see which looks best. Something about this one, the first one just works. So yeah, let's go with that one. Since I'm doing this in Photoshop, I don't have to have it at maximum strength. I can lower the opacity just until I dial it in right where I want it. So somewhere around 66% looks good. If I did this in Lightroom, then I would be stuck at 100% and I couldn't really change anything about that. So now that I've done that, what I'm going to do now is duplicate the layer again and go back to Camera Raw Filter, and let's just play with some of these colors. So we're going to go to HSL, and let's see. I'm going to take out some of the oranges because there's a lot of orange in the street, as you can see. I want to get rid of some of that. To about there. Those greens are a bit strong for me. Let's see if I can add some more color to the sky. That looks good. Let's see. I can change the hue. So the grass is like really green. I'm gonna try to like warm those greens up a little bit. The sky, I kind of like it how it is. And that looks pretty good to me. Brighten those oranges up a little bit. All right, bam. Flatten this image and then hit save. So when I go back to Lightroom, the image will be there. And if I go show you the original image, we went from this to this. This is when I do any cropping that I want to do. And the reason why I crop in Lightroom after is because if I need to change it, I can always go back. So if I want to do a crop for Instagram like this, well, I'm not stuck with this image. I can always go back and, you know, change it again to anything that I want. Okay, for the next photographer, they sent 3 pictures. So let's see the camera settings that they use. ISO 100, 77mm at f6.7 at 1/350th of a second. And they shot this on a Sony a6300 with a 18 to 135 f3.5 to 5.6 kit lens. Very familiar with this camera because this is the camera that I currently use. So let's see what they got. Right off bat, everything looks perfectly fine. I don't see anything causing any alarm in the settings. Everything looks good. Exposure is fine. I would say this is a very well shot image, all 3 of them. So the one I'm going to edit is this one, and like I said, I don't really see anything wrong with it at all. So let's see, let's just pull back some of the highlights just a little bit. White balance is pretty good. Just maybe warm it up a little bit. All in all, this is great. So let's open it in Photoshop. Duplicate my layer. Open my presets. The good thing about using presets is it saves a lot of time. Like once I edit a picture a certain way, I don't have to keep trying to do this over and over again. So I don't have to go in and edit the tone curves and do all this every single time I would edit a picture. It's good to know how to use all these things, but once you know how to use them, it's like you don't have to prove to yourself over and over again that you know how to use these tools. So save the presets. It saves you a lot of time in editing. And like I say, I do it in Photoshop because sometimes the effects are really heavy when you do it in the preset. Like if I go to my bold looks and if I hit a touch of color, like this preset is very strong. And if I don't want that look, then I can just dial down the opacity. And I think I'm gonna go with this preset actually. So you see the difference. And if I would have did this in Lightroom, this is what I would have been stuck with. So I can blend it out somewhere about here. Looks good. Flatten the layer, duplicate it again, and now let's see. Let's edit this a little bit. So increase the shadows. I'm going to add just a little bit of clarity and a little vibrance. And it looks pretty good as is. And like I say, if you want to go back to what you had, you can split the difference. You have full control over what you do in Photoshop. So that's why I like to do my presets in Photoshop. So now I'm going to close it, hit yes. Now it's going to be here. So this is the before and the after. And basically what I can do is, you want to do an Instagram crop. It wouldn't be too great for the dog, but hey, Instagram is Instagram. And if I didn't want to do the Instagram crop, for one thing, it's a little crooked, I think. So let's straighten that out. I think that straightened it out, I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe it's not crooked. You can use the angle tool and just put on the bottom of the bench. Bam. So now I know it's straight because the line is level. Okay, next photographer. Let's look at the camera setting. He sent over 5 images. And they all seem a bit underexposed. Let's see, ISO 640, 30mm f2.8 at 1/50th of a second. They shot this on Sony a6400 with the, I'm assuming this is the Sigma. Yeah, the Sigma 30mm f1.4. Love that lens. So he shot it at f2.8. So I'm assuming he wanted to retain a little sharpness. He wanted a little deeper depth of field. Didn't want to go too shallow with things. So I'm pretty sure that was intentional because he switched to 1.4 on these images. So what it seems like that it was darker later in the evening with these images than maybe he started here, because it looks like it's, you know, early in the day in this image and night caught up with him on this one. In general, when I'm shooting people, I would like to stay over 1/100th of a second, just because, you know, if I move a little bit, if they move a little bit, I won't have that motion blur. And you can see it's just a little bit of motion blur. So this picture would be sharper if he shot at a faster shutter speed and raised the ISO up a little bit. Sometimes people are scared to push the ISO because they don't want to introduce too much grain, but this is still extremely low. So don't think that because your ISO is not at 100 or you bump it up a little bit that the picture is ruined. I would rather have a grainy image than a blurry image. This one is not really bad, but I definitely wouldn't sacrifice motion blur for grain because I can do something about the grain. I can't do anything about the motion blur. So for these images, you see he shot it at 1/250th of a second, which is fine, perfectly fine. That's why we don't have any motion blur. See, everything is nice and sharp and detailed. Only thing I would do then is increase the ISO. So proper exposure on this probably would have been something like that. So it definitely was in the ballpark. So this is definitely a usable image, and when you shoot raw, you can do these things where you recover, you know, an image that might be underexposed or whatever. But the image that we edit is going to be this one. So let's see. I like to take it down just to see if I see anything in the sky. I think about right there is good. Reduce the highlights. Let's raise the shadows. Let's see, add a little more color. And this seems like a good starting point. So now I'm going to open it in Photoshop. So this time, instead of using a preset, I'm going to manually color grade this picture. So new layer, I'm still going to do it in Camera Raw. And what I'm going to do is let's go to the tone curve. Let's make it a little more punch to the image. And we're going to go to the blue slider and take a little blue out of the shadows, and then let's go to the red, and we're going to take some of the red out of the highlights. Alright, and we're going to go back to the normal tone, and I'm going to just lift the shadows a bit just to give it that nice fade look. So now I'm going to go back to the clarity and add a little bit more of that. And that's looking pretty good. Let's get the skin tones where I want them. Maybe about right here. Sometimes I just like to move the sliders to see what I'm adjusting. Let's get this to about kind of like it about there. It's not really any greens, aquas. I see a slight change, looks like right about here. Yeah, so let's go about right about here. Blues, I don't want to go too teal with it. Let's see. Maybe about right there. So this looks like it's affecting this highlight right here in her hair. And I definitely want that highlight to match the sky, because this doesn't make sense for it to be purple if the sky is not reflecting that color on her hair. So we're gonna keep it pretty much matching the reflection of the light. And let's see, luminance, let's increase the reds a little bit. This is a good way to brighten up skin tones, because sometimes you try to go in with the shadows and lift the skin tones, but it don't necessarily do what you wanted to do. So obviously you see it's lifting all the shadows when you can just go to the colors and lift them, you know, like this. Yellows, I don't want it to look dingy, so let's lift the yellows a bit. Greens, not really doing anything. It's not really doing anything. Now if I lift this, I'm losing my detail. I don't want to do that, so that's fine. That's fine. And that's the nails. Alright, that's fine. Bam. No preset. So this is our before, this is our after. Now for the next photographer, he sent me 3 pictures and I absolutely love all 3. Look at the camera settings: ISO 100, 50mm at f3.5, 1/1000th of a second. ISO 100, 50mm at f1.4 at 1/250th of a second. And ISO 160th f4, 1/60th of a second. And I really don't have anything to say about any of these images. He shot it on a Sony a7 III. I think this image right here shows that this person knows what they're doing the most, because it's hard to balance out, you know, the bright lights and being in a dark environment. So you have to balance out, you know, having the subject exposed nicely, but at the same time you don't want to overblow the highlights in the image. So this is like perfectly balanced. Like, I can't ask for anything better than this. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna touch all 3 of these images just out of respect. So this image, not even gonna change anything. Go to Photoshop. I love this image in color, but I also think this image would look great with a nice thick grained black and white preset. So let's see. Maybe something like this Kodak Tri-X 400. That looks good. Look at that nice grain in there. I mean, this is pretty good as it is. Yeah, I would call that great. So flatten the image. Bam, that's that one. This one being a film camera, I gotta put a film preset on it. That's just, I was probably gonna do that anyway, but hey, it's a film camera, right? Duplicate the layer. So now that I got this image open in Photoshop, one thing I know for a fact is that the presets or LUT or whatever I end up doing to this is gonna look better once I increase the exposure a little bit. So let's go to somewhere about there. I like the moody look how I had at first, but just to start with a better foundation for the preset, I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit just to bring out those details. So now when we go to the camera raw filter, presets, probably an Ecta. Let's go with number 2. So bam, that looks pretty good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a burn layer, which is basically just a tone curve with the midtones pulled down a little bit. And we're going to take the brush and set it to like the flow to like 3%, and then paint in around the camera just to make it pop a little more. So it might not look like it's doing much, but as you can see, it is. If you want to make it do more, just duplicate the layer a couple of times. Now this is a little too strong, so let's delete that last one. And that looks good. So basically I did this and then I just multiplied it 3 times. So let's merge all these layers together. As you can see what we started with. I'm gonna do a little more. Let's see. New layers so I can still have the old one. Just go to tone curve. I want to bring back some of that moodiness we had from the original image. So something like that. And let's flatten the image. Back to Lightroom. So back in Lightroom, and now what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to take out some of the oranges. Like that. Not too much because I like the leather strap. So I do want you to see the brown, but I don't want it to be as strong as it is. And usually that comes with some yellows too. Let's see if we change the hue. I like the greens. Not too green though. And let's see, maybe a vignette. Just a little bit. We could do an Instagram crop on it with a 4x5. Bam. So before and after. And with the last image, the A7 III has tons of dynamic range, so I'm pretty sure if I pull on the highlights, yeah, I can see the bulbs. That's great. So I don't really want to change the white balance. I can cancel out the orange lights by changing the white balance. So this is really like correct, I guess you could say, somewhere up in here. But the whole intent is to have these nice orange glowing warm bulbs in the image. So we're going to leave the white balance where it is, and I'm going to edit it in Photoshop. Now for this one, I'm going to add a preset, but just to create the tones in the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, let's say, Kodak Ektachrome, and let's go with this one, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit, and I don't want any grain in it. It's ISO 64, so it doesn't really have much grain. Let's take some of the green out, and that looks good right there. So basically using this just to get the tones, add a little contrast. Okay, so that's good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a dodge layer, a burn layer, and now we're going to use that 3% flow brush and just bring out some details. Let's go a little height in 3, maybe 10%. Yeah, that's better. So basically we just going around areas that I want to add a little contrast to. Background for sure. And it didn't really look like I was doing anything at first, but you can see if I turn it on and off, it definitely does something. So let's flatten the image, duplicate it again, and now I'm going to play with the tones a little bit. So let's see. I increase the saturation and then decrease the orange. Bring a little more life to her hair. I don't want to lose the warmness of the bulbs, so let's get that about there. And yeah, that looks good. Now see, I made her hair more like reddish, but it's actually more purple. So let's see if I can fix that. Oops. So let's see. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's much better. All right, cool. And actually, I probably can stack another preset on top of it, because, you know, being in Photoshop, we can do that. So the reason why you might want to stack presets is because when you start with one image and you add a preset, it's going based off the image that you started with. So now that we're at this point, if I add another preset, it's not starting with the same starting point that we had at first. So if I would have started off with whatever preset I'm about to add, it wouldn't look the same. So let's see. I love Portrait 400. So version number 13 looks pretty good. And as you can see, that's what it looks like, but that's a bit too much. So like I say, we can dial it down. Somewhere about here. Flatten the image. And bam. Close it. Yes. Back to Lightroom. As you can see, the before and after. Do an Instagram crop. No problem. Maybe push it up a little bit. Bam. Ready for Instagram. Next photographer, we have 5 sets of images that are drastically different. Starting with this one, ISO 400, 55mm f 5.6, 1/250 of a second. Let's see with camera and lens. So it's a Rebel SL2 with the kit lens, the 18-55, no flash. Okay, cool. So ISO 400, that might seem weird, and maybe the camera was on auto, I'm not sure, but the reason why this kind of makes sense is because I'm pretty sure the horse is walking, which means there's motion. So you want to have your shutter speed high enough to cancel out that motion. And we look at it, we still can see a little motion blur in the horse, especially at his foot in the dirt right here. So 1/250 of a second is good. That's a good shutter speed. Maybe a little faster would have been fine. But when you look at the ISO, it's 400 because at 1/250 of a second, it probably was a little too dark as well. It's still probably just a little bit overexposed, maybe, but this is perfectly fine. So maybe it should be about right here. That's minor. That's like irrelevant. But the ISO is at 400 because it's compensating for the shutter speed. So like I said in the other image, I would rather the ISO go higher and have the proper shutter speed than to try to keep this at ISO 100 and have the shutter speed too low, because then the horse foot would have been blurry. The only thing I would really see as a problem with this image is the fact that it's kind of cut off at the bottom. Maybe if you would have composed it a little lower, take out some of this headroom so we can see the horse's feet without getting cut off, that would have been even better. Now with this image, the eyeball is not perfectly in focus. I'm not sure if it's a focus problem or a motion blur problem, but it's just a little bit too fuzzy. If you look at this image, this is much better. I can see details in the iris of the eye versus this one where it's kind of like blurred out. So this one is definitely much more acceptable. This is the image I'm going to edit just because it gives me the vibe of like a scene from a movie. And if I look at the settings, ISO 400 at f5 at shutter speed 1/4000th of a second. Now I probably would have went for ISO 100 in this one because at f1/4000th of a second, I know the person is walking, but way before you get to 1/4000th of a second, the motion is frozen. Probably at about 1/2000th of a second, you wouldn't have gotten any motion blur in this image, even with the person moving. So you could sacrifice some of this shutter speed to lower your ISO, but ISO 400 is not high at all. But that's just nitpicking. So I probably can do this entire image in Lightroom. So what I'm gonna do is adjust the white balance a little bit, increase the shadows, It being an ISO 400 has a nice grain to it already, so I don't have to add any grain. I wanted to give it more of a film look. So let's do a 16:9 crop, and maybe something like that. Let's lower the highlights. Let's add a little bit more warmth into it. Tone curve. Something like that. Or the vibrance. Let's increase the vibrance. There's definitely a difference between saturation and vibrance. If I lower the vibrance all the way, you see that it's still color. If I increase it all the way, not every color is increased. But if I go to saturation, that pretty much takes up everything. And if I lower saturation, it pretty much takes down everything. So increasing the vibrancy is gonna give us that nice golden warmth that's in the picture. And I think that looks good as it is. And the last photographer in this episode sent me 8 pictures, and he specifically brought up this one because he called it an orange mess. So I guess this was kind of a challenge to me to see what I can do with this image. And looking at the settings, ISO 200, 50mm f1.8 at 1,000th of a second. Nothing's really wrong with those settings. It's in focus. All that's good. The only problem is the image is orange. Now, a lot of times what people would do is they would go to the hue and try to fix it like this, or maybe try to take down the saturation of the orange. And it's actually much simpler than that. It's not a problem with any of this. It's a simple white balance problem. So what I can do is lower the white balance. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the eye. I know this is white, so I want that part to be white. And somewhere in there is probably about right. So now you don't have an orange mess anymore. Now you would just go and edit this picture like normal. If you try to edit the picture when it looks like this, you're gonna have a problem because nothing you do is gonna look right. You want to fix. That's why white balance is the first thing on this list. You want to fix your white balance first. So if you have a white balance problem, fix that and then go on to your editing. The first image has a similar problem. It looks really greenish yellow, and that's just a white balance issue. So if we adjust the white balance, add some magenta, somewhere in here looks a lot better. And then it's slightly overexposed as well. So that's sucking out some of our colors. Let's see if I add a little more magenta. Maybe a little more warmth. Lower the highlights some. Increase the shadows. Alright, so now this is a much more usable image compared to what we started with. You try to edit this, you're gonna have a mess. Looking through the rest of these images, this one looks fine. Just need to bring the highlights down. This one is the one I'm gonna edit. This one, same thing, just bring the highlights down. Perfectly fine. Highlights down. This one, it looks good as is, honestly. It's ready to be edited. I showed you this one. And this one, probably a slight white balance issue. Yeah. Warm it up a little bit. Maybe add a little magenta. Bring down the highlights. I would call that ready to be edited. Now back to this image. I like this image. I don't know why I like this image, but this is my favorite one. So this is what I want to edit. So let's edit in Photoshop. Duplicate the layer. Open a preset just to set the tone. So we're gonna go to probably Kodak E200, probably version 10. Yeah. And wait, let me undo that. I'm gonna go to the preset again. What I want to do is version 10. I don't want any grain, because I'm just using it to set the tone. I'm not necessarily using it to make it look like the film. I just want the tone of the film. So now I have those tones without the grain. Lower the opacity to somewhere about here, and that looks good. So now I'm going to do some burning. It's at 10%. and go all around the edges of the face, just to bring more detail to the face. I'm going to define some facial structure, maybe here, some eyebrow, just to give it some more drama. So it looks good on and off. You see how much more it pops now? And I think that's pretty good. So flatten image, close, yes. So we have the before and after. You can make any little tweaks you want, like maybe add a little vignette, and we can add some of that grain in that we took out earlier, and bam. So that's it for this episode. Thank you to all the people who submitted images. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing my take on your photos, and hopefully something in this video was informative to anyone that is watching. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and look out for future submission details, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.